Hi, this is Mr. Brown, a IP from A-Flight, back with another, and what is becoming my long series of instructional videos for students. I guess that is a good thing. Today, I'd like to talk about task management, situational awareness, cross-check, and the use of your nav aids. Another way to phrase that would be all of those things that are at the very bottom of your grade sheet. Granted, you're going on to be a RPA pilot, and let's face it, you're not going to fly instrument approaches. You're not going to be doing overhead patterns. You're not going to be doing a wing over or a lazy 8 in your MQ-9. But the whole part of this course is we need to teach you those things on the bottom of your grade sheet. Those are the skills that you're going to need in your next job. Task management, situational awareness, risk management, decision-making, in-flight planning, in-flight checks, communications. The best way to do that is to teach you through contact and instrument sorties like we've been doing. And while some people tend to get bogged down in the details of how to fly this approach or how to fly that approach, it's really those bottom of the grade sheet items we're trying to get at. One of the keys of that is mission planning. If you haven't watched my video yet on how to chair fly, how to mission plan first and draw up what that script is you're going to chair fly, you really need to watch that because it's very important. Even when you go on to RPAs, knowing what the objective is, knowing some of the details of how you're going to accomplish it, you have to have that before you can go fly. And that does tie in with everything we're going to talk about today. Now, one of the things is Air Force Manual 11217 used to have a phrase in there that said you should use all of available nav aids to the maximum extent possible to maintain your situational awareness. What does that really mean, though? Well, what that means is, for example, if I am in VOR mode, how can I set up my GPS so I can watch the bearing pointer, I can watch what's on my GPS control head, distances and things in the background, because the VOR mode is in the foreground. That's what I'm really navigating off of. But how can I use these other things in the background to maintain my situational awareness? And let's face it, all of these things are tied together. If I have good situational awareness, I can space my tasks out to get things done, not get rushed, maintain my cross-check, my communication improves, my risk management decision-making improves. All of these things are tied together. If I am in GPS mode, what can I do with the VOR or the Localizer or my VHF nav radio in general in case I need to switch back to that, or maybe I can still view the VOR needle in the background and see what radial I'm on. If you haven't learned just yet, you're always on the tail of the white bearing pointer. So it tells you what radial you're on. And that's useful for when I'm fencing out of the South MOA and I'm trying to proceed direct to Auger. I have to keep an eye on my area. I have to get down to 13,000 before I leave the confines of my area. That's not the 24 DME. That's really the side radial. I need to make sure I'm down to 13,000 before then. Well, if I switch into GPS mode early and don't monitor my center radial, plus or minus 8 radials, how can I tell where I'm at? By looking at the tail of the bearing pointer. So having your VOR set to something useful, even when you're in GPS mode, can be beneficial for what you're doing. A couple other examples would be, I fly the ILS or the Localizer into Kelly. Let's see if I can find that approach here. If I fly the ILS or Localizer DME runway 16 at Kelly, I've done the high Kelly penetration. I come off the runway and I'm flying the Stinson climb out, let's say. That means I'm flying runway heading, climbing to 3,000. Well, when I look at my displays, I'm going to see a bunch of red X's because I'm no longer in that area of the localizer where I'm going to get adequate or proper, valid information. So I'm going to have red X's. Flying around with red X's tells me nothing. And if I'm going over to Stinson to fly a GPS approach, then what I really need to do is expeditiously get my GPS set on my next GPS waypoint. Maybe that's the final approach fix, maybe that's Halki, maybe that's Ganley. I need to do that first, really, before I start doing a bunch of other things, because I need to monitor where I'm at. How much more distance do I have to get my checks done? When do I need to start slowing? I need to back up the vectors that I'm getting. If I see that point is a beam me going behind me, hey, I'm past that next point. He's probably going to be turning me to a base here in a couple miles. So I need to quicken, speed up my checks and get everything done. If I am coming off of Kelly, the VOR to 3.2, I'm coming off that, I'm coming back to Randolph vectors for the ILS final. I do have a lot of checks to do. My A norms, I need to check ATIS and get my nav age set up for the approach. But the entire time I'm getting vectors, I'm not effectively or efficiently using my VOR nav aids. So why not, in the meantime, at least get them put on something useful for me? If I'm coming back to Randolph, let me put in channel 1, Timmit, and I at least have the Randolph VORTAC dialed in. I'm getting bearing, I'm getting distance. I see I'm coming up on 14, 15 miles, probably about to be turned to a base. How am I doing on the rest of my checks? If I am coming off of the GPS approach at Stinson, getting vectors back to Randolph, while I'm getting those vectors, if my GPS is still set at either Conley or it's sequenced into showing Keist, again, that's not giving me much situational awareness because I'm not going there. Why not take my GPS and quickly scroll down and set a waypoint of Worix, the final approach fix, or HNG 15R, which is the end of the runway of 15 right, or even KRND, which is center of mass of the Randolph Airport. Either of those would give me a lot more information for situational awareness and the pacing of my checks than leaving the GPS set at Keist. So that is something to think about. One thing that I see quite often is students get confused between the difference of what I'm cleared and what I can set my nav aids to. I don't have to be cleared for something before I set my nav aids to that. Matter of fact, clearance for the approach is probably the last thing that you're going to get. So if I come off of Kelly and I want to go to Halki and I ask for that, but he puts me on a vector for traffic, why don't I immediately set that GPS to Halki, direct enter? I can at least monitor my position from Halki. If I see I'm going past it, I know it's time to query the controller and ask, hey, am I cleared for this approach yet? Am I cleared to Halki? It allows me to look at things and utilize my time more efficiently. Along those lines, the minute I come off a runway, I start flying my climb out or my missed approach. Once I start talking to departure and they put me on any kind of a vector, the first thing I want to do after I level off and maintain aircraft control by setting pitch and power for that altitude, immediately I want to start getting into my checks, A norms. First thing I should do after I get level, get my power and my pitch set and trim it, is reach down and turn the ATIS on. Maybe I even turn that on while I'm still trimming the aircraft up. We need to learn how to multitask. And I can start running those checks and start setting myself up. I would rather get ahead on my checks and have time at the end where I can go back and review my approach and keep looking at that approach and double check that I have everything done. Much rather do that than to put those off until the last minute, and then I'm hectic, I'm scrambled to get everything done, I'm rushed. My task management goes up much higher. And the greater the risk of missing something or putting something in wrong. So just because I'm not cleared something doesn't mean I can't get those nav aids set up for that next item that I'm doing. I can watch the distance, I can watch the bearing pointer, a lot of things, a lot of information that will give me. Let's talk about turns. Turns and task management, situational awareness, cross-check. They all, again, fit together. If I am executing a turn to the maximum extent possible, I'm going to do nothing but turn, especially as I'm rolling into bank and rolling out of bank. I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to monitor my cross-check, monitor my attitude indicator, my VSI, all of those things. I'm not going to get into how to do a cross-check. You guys should know how to do the hub and spoke by now. If not, there's a good reading assignment for you. Look that up in 11-217. But to the maximum extent, while I'm turning, I'm going to do nothing but turn. Now, if we were to take a look at the ILS or Localizer 1.5 right at Randolph, I'm arcing on the 14 DME arc. I've calculated a lead point. I've started my turn. I need to get switched over to the Localizer frequency, which is channel 6. I'm not going to do that while I'm rolling the aircraft. People that do that, usually students will try to do that. They have lower experience levels. Consequently, what happens is they overbank or they underbank. Do nothing but establish that bank. Once I have the bank established at 30 degrees of bank and stopped, then I will reach up and switch over to Localizer. And I'll do that in my turn only because in this case, I have to. Now, if I switch back real quick to our approach over here at Kelly, I can also call up the in-flight guide. I'm flying the Kelly High Recovery. At 13 DME, I'm going to turn to heading 120, select channel 3, DME hold, select channel 4, and dial the 158 inbound course for the ILS into my course select window. Task management, okay? While I'm rolling into bank, I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to wait until after I've rolled out on the 120 heading. That way I won't overturn or underturn. If I'm already doing 150 knots, I have ample time to get everything done. Once I roll out on that heading, then I will go channel 3, DME hold, try to tim it, then go to channel 4, then tim it, then I will dial in 158. With the Localizer, and I'm not going to get into this part in this lesson, but all putting the final approach course in the course select window, all that does is it makes my HSI card directional. It is still operational, it's still giving me valid information. So if I don't have the 158 dialed in yet, and I see the ILS, the Localizer course is coming across, I turn to a 158 heading. That buys me time. Once I roll out, then I can get that 158 set in my course select window. So do one thing at a time until you gain enough experience to be able to do things. Typically what happens is we do all these other items while I'm in a turn, and I overturn. My cross-check then gets fixated on what I'm trying to dial in, my altitude control, because my trim may not be perfect, my altitude control suffers, my heading control suffers. I fall behind in my tasks, and then I have more tasks to do because I have to fix things as well as do the upcoming items. So break your tasks down, set your nav aids up early, do as many of those things early as you can, all right? That will help you immeasurably. Another thing to talk about would be communications. Something that we don't talk much about is positive handoff. When one agency tells you to contact another agency, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, all right? That controller has coordinated electronically with the next controller to take the handoff. That next controller cannot legally take the handoff. He cannot legally control you. The previous controller is still legally bound for your traffic and obstacle clearance until you make contact on that new frequency. Once you make contact and you get an answer, that controller hits a little button on his panel, tells the first guy that he now has control of you. So, frequency changes. Number one, you need to repeat those back. Make sure that you got the right frequency, and to make sure that that entire transmission was understood. Switch to that frequency, and it only takes a couple seconds to check in and say, "Hi, Whiskey 07's with you at 4,000," or whatever your altitude happens to be. So do that up front. Now you can go back to all those other tasks. Now positive control has happened. And if somebody needs to contact you, they know you're on frequency. They know they have legal control of you to go issuing whatever directives, whatever clearances they need to keep you safe. You're going to find that a lot when you go downrange flying RPAs and you're out talking to several different agencies at the same time, an AWACS, a couple ground controllers, and who knows who else. So don't leave them hanging. Check in on their frequency, let them know you're there, and then you can go back to doing those other tasks that you need to do. Lineup card versus your ETD. This again ties together with all of these things because quite often students will mission plan things. They will write down frequencies of nav aids, frequencies of controllers, courses, other information, decision altitudes, things of that sort on their lineup card. You are required to have those pages open to the phase of flight that you're in on your ETD, actually open in the cockpit, all right? Most people don't fly with ETDs, they have the paper copy. So those things are required to be open when you're on that phase of flight. So if you need a frequency, an altitude, a course setting, don't look at your lineup card, look at your ETD. For what we do in our sims, your ETD is better positioned to see that and keep your cross-check going than to have to look down in your lap or off to the right, down on the circuit breaker panel, in the darkness and try to figure out what that number says. Besides, when you wrote that, you could have done a typo. You could have transposed numbers, wrote the wrong number, wrote a reciprocal heading, for example. So when you look those things up in flight, always look at the source document. That is the chart, IFR chart for what you're flying, or it's the instrument approach plate for what you're doing, or it's the in-flight guide page for what you're doing. Look those things up there. I think you will find that that helps your cross-check immensely when you do that. One last item I want to quickly talk about is the El Dorado check. That is a greatly misunderstood check. Let's see here. Did not plan for this, so give me a moment to try to open up a notes page here and see what I can write. Can I get a new notes page? No, I can't. So maybe we can edit all of that out. Anyway, if I am doing an El Dorado check because I want to fly this approach, El Dorado, it's really once upon a time was called a bold Rado check. B, have a backup approach in mind in case you don't get rain or in case the GPS is unreliable. I think we're at the point nowadays where we don't need to do that. GPS is very reliable. So I would ignore that. O, OBS has to be off. You cannot check rain while OBS is on. So if you want to do an Eldorado check, that's fine, but quietly to yourself think, oh, I need to make sure OBS is off before I do an Eldorado check. Now, an Eldorado check should only take you maybe 15, 20 seconds to do. You should already have the approach loaded. And D, direct. And this is where things are misunderstood. You need to have a direct path in the GPS versus your current position to the missed approach point in order to check rain. Otherwise, for example, if I am flying the Auger Stinson recovery into to Jablo, while I'm in my MOA, the flight plan says I'm going to go to Auger, then I'm going to go to the Randolph VOR, then I'm going to go to the Stinson VOR, then I will go to Jablo. That is not a direct path to the missed approach point. Now, if I delete the Randolph VOR and the Stinson VOR, then I can do an Eldorado check while I'm in the South MOA because I have a direct path in my GPS. It will then show Auger, Jablo, Ganley, Thelma, missed approach point. That is good. Now, most certainly, if I'm proceeding direct to a point on the GPS approach, that, of course, is good. I mean, that would be the best case, but you don't have to have that. If I'm getting vectors to a GPS final, then in order to do my Eldorado check, that direct, that means I need to have the final approach fix set. I know I'm on a vector, and I may not actually be heading direct, but keep in mind that the rain check will check 15 minutes prior and 15 minutes after it estimates you to arrive at the missed approach point. That's more than enough time to take into account a couple minutes of a vector before he turns you onto a base leg. So if I'm getting vectors, I can do an Eldorado check, even if I'm not cleared the approach yet. Set the final approach fix as your active waypoint, and you can check RAIM. Remember, RAIM is stat 5. The first O is OBS. It is a question. Do I want it on or do I want it off? I'm not going to get into that today, but make sure you are familiar with the -1 and the 3 times it says that we use OBS. Display. This is where some of the problem comes up. We get caught up with this. It affects our cross-check. It affects our in-flight checks, our task management or SA. If I'm going to use OBS, then display is more than just putting myself in GPS mode. It also means I have to set the inbound final approach course. In this case, at Stinson, 332. Because eventually, he will put me on a dogleg heading, and he's going to tell me to maintain that heading until I intercept final. If I don't have final already dialed in, what is on the approach plate, how do I know when I have intercepted it? So part of display is also not just get myself in GPS mode, but if I've used OBS, I have to set the inbound course in the course select window first. And then, of course, the last O is OBS off. When do I turn that off? According to the -1, the earliest that I can turn that off is when I am, air quote, established on final, end air quote. What does that mean? Well, for a GPS approach, I have to be within half full scale deflection or 1 dot in a T6. Even though I'm on a dogleg, I can turn that off. Turning that off early is, my understanding, kind of a gamble. Maybe it will stay what you set in there. Maybe it will recalculate. If you are established on final within half a dot, within half full scale deflection or 1 dot, then it really won't change. It's going to calculate that same heading. Now, the latest you can turn that off is the 2 mile point. Don't think of this as at the 2 mile point, I turn it off. The 2 mile point is the latest that you can turn it off. So once you get established on final, reach up, get that turned off early, and then be waiting with bated breath at 2 miles to make sure that things turn green. All right, so that is kind of my quick and dirty and impromptu lesson on task management, situational awareness, cross-checking your use of nav aids. Try to get ahead early. You don't have to wait for a clearance before you set your nav aids. Do things early, use them to monitor where you're at. Controllers make mistakes also, and you as the pilot in command are ultimately responsible for the safe conduct of your sortie. So use these things. Spread your tasks out. Find those crunch points, such as a turn. Don't do things in a turn. Spread them out. Before the turn, after the turn, if at all possible. I hope some of this helps for some of the students that are newly getting into instruments. A lot of this still applies to contact. So if you're a contact person, this is still some very good information to use. Just substitute some of the contact references or contact procedures, recoveries for some of the other things that I've talked about. If you have any questions, come find me. I'm Mr. Brown. I am down in A-Flight. Happy flying.